So this kid goes, "Why don't you act black?" And I'm like, "Well, what do you mean? Why don't I act black? What are you saying?" And he says, "Well, you don't curse." He says, "Well, you get good grades." He said, "Well, you're not in a gang." And he just started rattling off all of these negative stereotypes about being black and how I didn't fit them. And man, I'll tell you, at 6 years old, it just broke my little brain. I was like, wow, this is what he thinks it means to be black.
We'll discuss race and how it plays a factor and how we didn't even talk about this topic because we were afraid.
A Black Executive Perspective.
Welcome to a Black Executive Perspective podcast, a safe space where we discuss all matters related to race, especially race in corporate America. I'm your host, TonyTidbit.
And I'm your co-host, Chris P. Reed. We always like to start out by giving a shout out to our partners at Code M Magazine. Code M Magazine, whose mission is saving the black family by first saving the black man. That's Code M Magazine, 2Ms.com. Check them out at CodeMMagazine.com.
Definitely check them out. And today, we're going to check out Will Fullwood, an education and technology professional, lawyer, and creator of the Contraband Wagon, to explore his lifelong journey towards race consciousness. Sparked by a formative experience at age 6, Will's dedication to understanding and discussing race led to a creation of his platform, known for hosting deep and transformative conversations on anti-racism. Today, Will will share how dialogue can be a powerful tool in countering white supremacy and the importance of embracing anti-racism as a core value.
Before we go too deep down this path with Brother Will, let me just give you a little bit of background on him. He's obviously a professor, attorney, and the founder of Contraband Wagon, a platform where he hosts in-depth 2-hour live stream conversations about race. With 20 years of experience as a teacher, Will pulls from a multifaceted educational background to foster engaging and thought-provoking dialogue on anti-racism. His unique blend of academic insight and practical teaching experience brings depth and clarity to complex conversations, while encouraging meaningful absorption of the material and tangible actions that we should take to help this situation. Will Fullwood, welcome to a Black Executive Perspective podcast.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's a pleasure and honor to be here.
I appreciate it. So let me ask you this before we get into this too heavy, because I think it's going to be a heavy one. Tell us a little bit about where you are, where you're residing, where your family is, things of that nature.
All right, I'll try to make it not so heavy now. I reside in North Carolina, born and raised in Durham, North Carolina, and now I live nearby in Clayton, North Carolina.
Okay, and how far is Clayton from Durham, Raleigh area?
Yeah, so it's about 40 minutes from my parents' house in Durham.
Okay,
and it's about 20 minutes from Raleigh.
All right, buddy. And married, kids, anything, my man?
No, I am partnered up, but I am not married, and no kids.
Okay, all right. But you a Carolina Panther fan? Football? I think that's
I'm actually a huge
team
basketball fan, man. I grew up. Both my parents worked at Duke Hospital when I was growing up.
Okay.
So I was a huge Duke fan. Used to go to Cameron Indoor Stadium during the summertime. My gymnastics coach, when I did gymnastics, he was a Duke graduate. So I was all about Duke and met Coach K when I was a kid, played with Wojciechowski and Grant Hill and Elton Brand and a bunch of those players. JJ Redick, I played with all those players growing up, in practices and whatnot. So yeah, Duke Blue through and through, brother.
Bro, we may have to stop this episode. All right, this Dookie. Oh my God, I didn't have them all now, but we love you anyway, though, bro. And I can imagine that was a great experience, right? Playing and practicing with all those guys that ended up going to the NBA, and now JJ is the coach of the Lakers.
Exactly. It was an amazing experience, and I never take any of it for granted.
Absolutely. And look, we don't want to take you for granted as well. I mean, and you're going to dive into it. You've been hosting live events. You've been on other platforms. And we're excited to dive into the Contraband Wagon. But tell us a little bit and tell the audience, why did you want to come on a Black Executive Perspective podcast to talk about this topic?
Well, first of all, I heard about you, Tony, from our mutual friend Sima. And Sima was one of your previous guests on the show. And I met Sima through social media, through Twitter, actually. And she kind of clocked me and the discussions that I was having. I clocked her and the discussions she was having. We appeared on each other's platforms and shows. And she was like, "You've got to meet Tony. You've got to talk to Tony," you know? And so it was really her recommendation that first got me interested in Black Executive Podcasts. And with a little more research, that's all I needed to see that this was definitely a place I needed to come and talk about the work that I'm doing, because I'm doing a lot of similar work to what you're doing, brother. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Sima is my girl. And she's just fantastic. You had me a little worried in the beginning though. You was like, Tony, you know, came on because of you and what I heard. I'm like, is there APB out? All right. Is you know, what did I do
You're
wrong?
a public
Right?
figure now, Tony.
Yeah.
You're out there,
oh my
man.
God. I'm kind of, I gotta be careful. But no, that is exciting, man. And obviously it'd be great for all of us to get on and do an episode together, me, you, Sima, and Chris, which we'll probably dive into in the future. So that's awesome, man. Are you ready to talk about it though, my brother?
I'm ready, brother. Born ready.
All right, Bill. Let's talk about it.
So to build this up and kind of give everybody a baseline, people who may not be as familiar, what was the impotence of how you came up with the Contraband Wagon? Give us a little bit of game as far as like, when did this all occur? Obviously, you're born and raised North Carolina. So how did this all come about, being in a southern state?
Okay. Well, in order to tell that story, I'm going to have to take you all the way back, Chris, to when I was 6 years old. All right. 6 years old. And anybody can go read or listen to the poem that I wrote called Contraband of Race War, which kind of goes through this origin story. And when I was 6 years old, I was walking through the halls of my elementary school, Fayetteville Street Elementary School in Durham, North Carolina. And one of my classmates came up to me and he said, "Hey, why don't you act black?" And I was kind of like, what does he mean by that? You know, because my dad had taught me about the civil rights movement at home, you know, by checking out VHS documentary tapes about the civil rights movement and Dr. King from the public library. So I had a little bit of home education about race and civil rights, but everything that I had come to understand about it up to that moment was that it was a thing of the past, you know, and the dominant racial narrative at that time was that we were living in a post-racial America, even though I was going to an exclusively Black elementary school in an exclusively Black neighborhood. You know, I was not quite attuned to what all that meant at the time, right? So this kid goes, "Why don't you act black?" And I'm like, "Well, what do you mean? Why don't I act black? What are you saying?" And he says, "Well, you don't curse." He says, "Well, you get good grades." He said, "Well, you're not in a gang." And he just started rattling off all of these negative stereotypes about being black and how I didn't fit them. And man, I'll tell you, at 6 years old, it just broke my little brain. You know, I was like, wow, this is what he thinks it means to be black. And, you know, not only was it devastating for me to recognize that reality and what it would mean for him, right? To think that he would have to live up to all these negative stereotypes in order to be considered black as part of his identity. But also, it made me realize that all of the implications that race was a thing of the past, that racism was a thing of the past, that every adult I had encountered up to that point reinforced for me, either explicitly or implicitly, that wasn't true. It was very clear that wasn't true, because I wouldn't be asked this question in this manner if that were true. So it was really that moment that sparked my curiosity on the subject of race and made me want to investigate more. But I also realized in that moment that I couldn't do it by just asking people because of the false impression they had already given me. Everyone, I mean. And so really it became a decades long investigation about race that I was doing in secret. secretly studying, secretly asking questions, digging deep. I joke with people these days that if I don't bring up the conversation doesn't happen. And that was my experience during those years. So I never had to be, worried about being found out or anything. I was in complete driver's seat for that investigation. And eventually, long story short, I went to undergraduate school in upstate New York at the University of Rochester, studied there, became a New York City public school teacher after that, taught for 12 years, also went to law school in New York. And then I came back to North Carolina about 6 years ago. And one of the first things that I did was I was like, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and start formalizing these conversations on race. And I started a racism discussion group, meetup group. And it's still active today. All my events are on there, www.meetup.com/racism discussion group. And I took my mom, some of my friends, and just a few random people from the community who were interested. And we had our first conversation. And that's how it all started.
Wow.
Let me ask you a question. Because obviously we are different in this regard. I thought that you came back and you was going to say you found that brother and had some words for him about how great you were now and look at me now type stuff. But, that's different.
I did find him, in fact.
Okay, good. Okay, good.
We can talk about that, yeah.
Yeah. But let me ask you, at that time, being impressionable, being 6 years old, obviously in that formative time in your life, you don't know how to define culturally anything. But you didn't take offense to that, it didn't seem, based on your recollection of the story. You kind of absorbed that and then let it ponder and then let it, slowly burn into who you have become and some things that you've shaped yourself around. Why do you think your reaction to that question was simply a question and not how we tend to, or how some people tend to take things as a challenge or a dismissive, negative affront? Why were you able to absorb that so maturely at 6 years old, do you believe?
Well, man, I was a precocious little boy. All right. I have always had a very strong sense of self. I couldn't tell you where that came from.
Okay.
But I knew who I was very, very early on, before I even entered school. And I do attribute some of that to my parents, who really instilled in me strong values. And I'm very grateful for them. I thank them all the time on my show, because without them instilling me strong values, that probably would have been my reaction, right? I probably would have been offended. I probably would have felt like I had to change myself or do something, right? But no, there was no hint of that. I just felt sorry for him that he had taken that in and defined himself that way. But I knew who I was back then, and it has always been very difficult for anyone to shake my core. My core has been solid from a young age, so I couldn't tell you why. All I can tell you is that was the reality.
It's time to rethink your protein. AgileLab's protein bars are crafted with high-quality protein, double the leucine, and enriched branched-chain amino acids, essential for optimal muscle recovery. Finally, a protein bar that works as hard as you do. So visit agilelabs.com and use the code BEP to get 20% off. That's agilelabs.com, promo code BEP.
So let me compound that by the fact that a lot of times you can have a good constitution and life will ruin that on purpose, right? Life is not set up for you to be as strong and staunch in yourself as you have become over the years. Tell me a story about the Office of Minority Affairs during college and how that impacted your journey and how that didn't dissuade you in any way.
Yeah, actually, that's an interesting story, because so the Office of Minority Affairs was at the University of Rochester when I was an undergrad student. And I actually received a visit from one of their representatives during orientation week of my freshman year. A Black gentleman came, and it was like me, little Black boy, getting orientated to undergrad, excited about college with all these white people. And he came while we were all together in the common room, and he asked to speak to me privately. And I had some inkling of why he was there. And I was like, no, anything you got to say, you can say right here in front of everybody, And he talked about how he was from the Office of Minority Affairs and that he was there to give me support, and offer the office's assistance as I was making my way through college. And interestingly enough, Chris, I was offended. I was offended by that at that time, because I felt, why would he think that I would need that? To me, he was being dismissive of my abilities, the fact that I worked so hard to get into this school, get a scholarship. I made my way here through a lot of trials and tribulations and effort. And I felt like he was dismissing that effort by coming here saying, "Oh, we'll help you out." And I was pretty nasty to him. I'll be honest, man. I was not nice in sending him on his way. And he said, "If you change your mind," he was totally cool with it. He was like, "If you change your mind, let me know." And yeah, I dismissed him. And of course, you can imagine what happened after that. Reality kind of struck through the years while I was in college. And it took a while. It took all 4 years, brother, for me to realize that I was experiencing the consequences of white supremacy in college over and over and over and over and over again in various different ways, in various different scenarios. And I was definitely willfully blind to a lot of it, just not wanting to accept that reality, wanting to believe in the American dream and that everybody is created equal and that everyone gets a fair shot as long as you work hard and show your effort. I really wanted to believe in that, very strongly. But, that is one place where I was chipped away at over and over and over until I was forced to acknowledge that, okay, this guy came to me for a reason, and I turned him away. And unfortunately, I never was able to take advantage of the opportunities that I probably could have benefited greatly from if I had done so at that time. But I do plan in the future with my work with the Contraband Wagon to go back to that office and tell my story. And I guess give them some consultation about one way they could have dealt with a hard-headed, stubborn boy like me. And also just to try to make sure that other students don't allow their willful blindness to get in the way of what the office can do for those students.
Right. Let me, buddy, I just gotta, when you was talking about your racial awakening at 6 years old and hearing that story, the first thing I think of is, what 6-year-old is cussing? What 6-year-old is in a gang? What six? So that's
You've never been to Durham, huh?
Yeah, but I guess not, because it was just that right there. Just that just was very amazing that happened. Let's go here. So Contraband Wagon. Tell us where did the name come from? What does it mean? Why don't you dive into that a little bit?
Sure. So when I was first establishing the Contraband Wagon, like I said, I started the racism discussion group, but before I did that, I had about a month and a half of meditation, I would say. Okay. Meditating on this idea of starting these conversations formally. This is after decades, like I said, of doing my own little secret investigation. So I thought about what I wanted to do, why I wanted to do it, and that's how I wrote that poem, Contraband of Race War. And at the end of that poem, there's a line that says, "Until every human being can look on me and see an honest to God human being, then I will remain contraband." Hearkening back to the slave trade. It was kind of going back to how I felt in college, right? I felt trapped. I felt trapped in this world of white supremacy that was trying to beat me down, that was trying to shackle me, that was denying my talents, my gifts, and my opportunities. And I realized that I couldn't will that away. You know what I mean? I couldn't wish that away. I was going to have to do something more, something greater. And the more that I educated myself on what that was and all the people throughout history who have been fighting against those shackles, I realized that this is a generations long battle that probably won't end within my own lifetime.
Right.
And so, the name Contraband kind of came out of that idea of the reality of my existence that, became apparent to me over time. And the Contraband Wagon, because I want everyone to hop on that bandwagon. All right. And get on board with breaking those shackles. And because that's what we need. We need a critical mass of people who are willing to take action and take action under the banner of anti-racism.
Right.
So that's where it comes from.
What was when we started the Black Executive Perspective podcast about 13 months ago, we didn't just jump out and start having conversations, right? It started 4 years earlier, in corporate America. And so my question is, in the beginning of when you kicked off the Contraband Wagon and you were having these conversations, tell us a little bit, what was some of the first things that, was people receptive? What type of feedback did you get? How did you feel, even though you were a young kid? And as Chris said earlier, and you stated that you were very perceptive and this and that. And then you started studying and you became a history major, the whole 9 yards. Now you're having these conversations. Tell us a little bit how it kicked off and how it went.
Well, it was a little bit disappointing in the beginning, I have to say. Everybody who I talked to, my friends, my family, about starting it, they had the same reaction. They all expressed concern for my physical safety. And I was just like, wow. So all of y'all are concerned about my physical body, like there was no encouragement. There was no enthusiasm for what I wanted to do. It was all like, you sure you should be doing this?
And why did they think that? What was the reason they were talking that way?
Well, I mean, it was, that was another frustrating part, right? Because they never really articulated a reason, right? And I think underneath it all was like, okay, well, you're going to get backlash for talking about the subject of race, almost like, bringing up politics or religion at the dinner table or something like that. You know what I mean? Like a taboo topic that people get agitated about. It inflames people's emotions. And, people who are promoting anti-racism ultimately get attacked by individuals and systemically. So I think they were just in general worried about that, which, is legit. I was worried about it too, right? Like that's why I had to take time to meditate on what I was doing and steel my resolve. But it was just disappointing that people weren't more excited about the prospect of what I was creating. And I've kind of experienced that throughout my life, not just with this. Every single thing I've ever said I was going to do, I've done, brother. And yet people still have skepticism and a lack of enthusiasm when I first say things. And this was no different. So that was disappointing. But, I've been doing this for over 4 years now, and some of those people have come around, I'll tell you one story that happened when I was kind of first getting started. I was at a house party, and I was one of 2 Black people at this house party. Everybody else was white. And I was talking to them about how I had fears about not getting a lot of support, for what I was trying to do. And they laughed, and they were like, oh man, of course we're all going to support you. Like these fears, they're just trying to make me feel like they were totally unfounded. Let me tell you, brother, not a single one of them supported me. Not a single one of them supported me over the next 2 years. In fact, one of them just started supporting me on my Patreon a few months ago and then canceled a few months later. So it was just experiencing stuff like that, this disappointment of people deluding themselves, wanting to believe that they're supportive, but not really being, and going through that, getting people to come in to support me for a limited time and then dropping off and then having to pick up that slack, learning about all the technology I had to learn. I'm not a tech person, but I had to learn so many different technologies. I had to fund it all myself. I don't have a lot of money. They don't pay teachers out here enough to be starting side gigs, let me tell you. And yeah, so it was just a lot of trials and tribulations. But, I feel like 4 years in, I'm turning a corner here. I'm getting more support. I'm getting more collaboration, and my hard work is paying off. So it was all worth it.
Let me ask you this, because you're obviously extremely passionate, extremely eloquent. But how do you reconcile the difference between being passionate and being militant? Because the subject matter allows for a degree of, you being kind of upset and militant in the presentation. But looking at some of the previous pods that you've done or conversations you've had with white folks, and the way that you bring it about is you're really receptive to dialogue. How has it always been that way? Did you start off wagging fingers and proving a point, or did you evolve to this, more subtle kind of inclusive dynamic of conversation?
I would say that I've always been very big on dialogue, even as a child. And I think part of that came out of what I told you before, because I had to investigate this secretly, right? So you can't really be militant when you're doing that. You kind of have to find ways of bringing it up like that are subtle, and you have to bring people into the conversation without them even realizing they're in it. So I learned a lot of different conversation and communication techniques through the years by doing that. And I was a peer mentor in middle school. I was a private tutor throughout middle school and high school and beyond. I was a teacher, right? So communication is a big part of your job as a teacher. And I think that played a huge role in how I communicate. Yeah, I think just all those decades of experience and practice is really what allowed me to realize, okay, these are the best ways to get people involved in the conversation. And that doesn't mean that I'm a walkover or anything like that, but so I don't really distinguish between militancy and the way that I dialogue.
Okay.
I am militant. I'm just militant in a way that is disarming, I guess you could say. Guerrilla warfare, perhaps you might
Absolutely.
say.
Okay, got you here. You picking your spots. Were there a time that you can share with us comfortably where you were the angry black man?
Not really, man. I mean,
Okay.
I don't let anger rule me. I've been very good at that throughout the course of my life. I'll tell you, when I get angry, I go. I'm a silent angry type.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, I'm not really a yelling angry type. I get real quiet. You want to be afraid if I'm quiet.
Right. Okay, understood.
Let me ask you this, my man. One of the things, you're big on anti-racism.
Yeah.
Right. It's one of the things that's a mission of yours. And a lot of times people don't understand what anti-racism is. So I'm going to play a quick little clip. I want you to listen to it. And then I would love to get your feedback on it. And I'd love for you to dive into what is anti-racism and how everyone can get involved.
We'll just call it spade a spade. Saying I'm not a racist and being anti-racist is like two different things.
When most people think of racism, they think of, let's say what happened to George Floyd, or they think of the KKK, or they think of slavery. And when that is kind of your perception, it's very easy to say, well, I would never do that. I would never do that awful thing, which is valid, but it's more nuanced than that.
Someone saying like, I'm not a racist doesn't help the problem. Simply saying I'm not doing that does not save somebody's life. It's like witnessing someone getting jumped and being like, hey, I didn't jump him. It's like, but you also just stood there while he or she got jumped. And being an anti-racist is like, one, getting involved and being like, break it up, stop this. And two, speaking out to make sure it never happens again.
What's your thoughts on that, my brother?
I really like that. It's the difference between being passive and being active, and you can't passively be an anti-racist. And I think that's an important point that is made in that clip. That's something that I stress as well. You must take action. If you're not taking action, then you're not really being anti-racist and you're not living out that value. And what I want to try to get people to understand is that you don't necessarily need to save someone's life, okay, in order to be anti-racist. All you need to do is have the conversation. That's enough. And that is one thing that I'm trying to promote with the Contraband Wagon, is that having the conversation is enough. You will already be identified as somebody who is fighting back against racism and white supremacy just by having the conversation. So all of the negative consequences that are attended to that, and for anyone who declares himself an anti-racist, will come just from having the conversation. So you have to be worried that you're not doing enough.
Right. Right.
How do you dissuade people from feeling like the only way to exhibit racism is fire and brimstone, worst case scenario type of stuff? Because what you're saying is, usually when something happens, social upheaval, things of that nature, then it's easy to earmark racism was here. But it's so many subtle, microaggressions and all these other things. How do you get them to understand that it's bigger than just the big events or the splash, type of opportunities that exist to exhibit racism?
That's a good question. So I have a particular way of doing this. And again, it all comes from that 6-year-old experience. So
He was the man.
so basically, like we all know, okay, here at BEP, that race and racism it's endemic to the environment, right? It's a part of like our environment. I think a lot of people are so focused on who is racist, right? Like you are a racist because of this or that or whatever. So I try to get away from that. And the way that I get away from it is by getting people to think about their own evolution of race consciousness. Like people are not born understanding black, white, a racial hierarchy. There comes a point in time when you learn about it, okay, where you are taught about it, either explicitly or implicitly or both. And there's a time where your understanding of it changes and evolves over time, just like I went through, right? Just like you two have went through, just like everybody goes through, regardless of how we're racialized. So I start and lead all of my guests on the show with an exploration of their own evolution of race consciousness. And then I start from where they're at, right? Because that allows me to then make connections to, okay, well, you experienced this or you observed this, right? And then your thoughts about it change, right? Well, let's think about 2024 now. And then I'll draw a connection to the present, or I'll draw a connection to some of these more subtle ways, and I'll get them to wrestle with that. Because ultimately, if you just try to preach at people, and just try to tell them this is how it is, and you either accept or reject, people are going to reject it, because that's just something I learned from teaching math for all these years as well. Like when you draw connections to what people are already familiar with and already comfortable with and already curious about, that is when learning happens and growth happens. So that's how I do it. I don't try to just like I said, preach at people. I try to use their own experience as exemplars to help show them how the world around them really is and how they might have been blinded to some of that.
Right.
When you have these conversations, trying to find an effective way to transfer the knowledge and to build those relationships, what happens in your opinion or in your experience? I believe that there's times in my life where I've had conversations and I thought they were going to be transformative or enlightening. And some of the reception I got from those, whether it be race, religion, or politics, is I know enough for what fits me and my needs. Like I'm good. Like I'm good over here. Like you got a wealth of knowledge, Chris, and I appreciate you having read all these things and seen all these things in your articulation. But ignorance is bliss, and I'm good enough. What say you to those individuals when you encounter those folks that just feel like, I want to stay in my bubble?
I say, okay,
Okay.
go ahead, stay in your bubble. Okay. All right. I just make sure that they understand that they're not in a bubble. Like they are, just because you're willfully ignorant doesn't mean you're in a bubble. Okay. Your willful ignorance still has an impact. And as long as they acknowledge that and they still make the same choice, that's their choice. They've chosen to ally themselves with white supremacy because that's what that is. And I accept it. I'm focused on the people who are open to growth, who are open to learning. Yeah, if you decide you're not open to learning, guess what? You're not going to learn. That's true of anything, including this.
Right. You know, one of the things I always, it took me a while to understand is that a lot of people, words paint pictures. And in the clip that we played in the beginning, the lady talked about people think when they think of races, somebody being a racist is Ku Klux Klan or it's something that's very derogatory, right? And then when you use the term anti-racist, 9 times out of 10 people don't know what that means. Okay, because at the end of the day, they're like, I'm not a racist. Okay, so I don't need to get involved in anti-racism, right? Because that's only for the people who are deemed racist, right? So let me hear your thoughts because one of the things I was reading Abram Kendi's book on how to be an anti-racist, okay, and he really opened my eyes to something that, at the end of the day, all people do racist stuff. Okay. Everybody does. Right. And so can you talk specifically, just so everybody's clear, what is race? Because we all have done racist stuff. And then the difference between turning that racist stuff to anti-racist, which is about action. Give us some examples of that.
Sure. Yeah. So my thoughts about racism and anti-racism. So I don't know if my thoughts are in line with Ibram X. Kendi. I'm gonna tell you right now, okay? But I'm gonna tell you just
your own perspective. It's all
yeah,
good.
yeah. I'm gonna give
All right.
my perspective on it, okay? So here's how I think about it. Here's how I frame it. A tyrannical racial hierarchy was created. This was meant to rank human beings and their worth from top to bottom, with Black people being on the bottom and white people being on the top, and everyone else somewhere in the middle. And it's fluid, right? Some people were ranked lower and then they were, kind of graduated into the white category. Okay. And various different things over time and over history. And it's all based on power. So racism occurs and you act out racism when you reinforce that hierarchy. Any action that reinforces that hierarchy is racism as far as I'm concerned. Okay. Any action that fights against that hierarchy is anti-racism. So that is the way that I conceptualize it. So now to bring it to some specific examples, right? So basically, the reason why I say, I'll start with the anti-racism part. The reason why I say having the conversation is enough is because this country, and this country being America, has created a situation where there is literally no environment that exists that is designed to dismantle racism. There's no environment that we have created to have dialogue where people can deconstruct all the programming that they've received over the years about race, where all the myths that they've been indoctrinated into, all the white supremacist tenets that they've either explicitly or implicitly received. There is no environment that exists for them to deconstruct that. If you are having the conversation, you are creating that environment. That is an act of anti-racism.
Can I just jump in real quick, buddy?
Yeah.
So that's an excellent point. Okay. But let's take it to the next level. It's not that there's no space to destroy it. There's also a narrative that it doesn't exist any longer. 100%. Right? You see my point? There's more of that space that this ain't real. They're making excuses. Racism is over because of slavery is over. And now Black people, because we had a Black president, or we see Black people rising in different things, there could not be any racism going on. You have more of that conversation than you have the conversation you just got finished talking about to deconstruct it. Let me hear your thoughts on that.
If you like what you hear and want to join us on this journey of making uncomfortable conversations comfortable, please subscribe to a Black Executive Perspective podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Hit subscribe now to stay connected for more episodes that challenge, inspire, and lead the change.
Yeah, no, I agree with you that they both exist. That conversation has been going on for over 100 years. People have been saying that for generations. So I kind of, because I know that from my historical study, I don't think of it that way, kind of, because that dialogue, all of it, all of the rejection of doing anything to combat racism has been going, like there's nothing new under the sun in that category. So, but yeah, you're right, that does exist. It is in spades. I just think in 2024, with how connected we are, with how much is visible, how much racism is visible at this point, I think it's a little bit more difficult for people to reasonably make that argument, especially the younger generation, for them to believe it. And I think that that's part of the reason, actually, Tony, that I started getting more public, because I saw that with the advent of technology and our interconnectedness going to a new level, that it was going to be harder for the mechanisms of white supremacy as they've operated in the past to continue operating and having their same effectiveness in stopping the conversation from moving forward.
Right.
So I was like, all right, now's the time. Let's get into it and start building. And a lot of other people seem to have that same idea. And here we are right now. That's why you and I are talking right now.
The tough part is you're swimming upstream in the idea of ignorance has become so easily reproductive. So if you think about something as simple as now I'll just go through a scenario here. Make America great again. And then you ask those people wearing that paraphernalia, when was it great? And then they go, duh.
Or when wasn't it great?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Either or.
When wasn't it great? Right.
They don't have anything because they're so okay being in a bubble of ignorance, and it's become acceptable socially, right? So society has allowed to embrace this level of ignorance where you're trying to combat it with education, enlightenment, examples, things of that nature. How daunting is that of a task for you at this point in time when, like you said, technology has put information at our fingertips, right? You got the information superhighway. If you want to know, you could really know. You could really go there.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't want people, so now more than ever, so much want to exist in their own little private Idaho that they don't lean into the greater understanding or think about the greater goods, because as I stated before, I have what suits my needs. I'm good over here.
Yeah.
How do you combat that?
You don't combat it, Chris. That's not what we're combating.
I mean, that's just about line, bro, because then you ain't gonna make no headway.
Okay, gotcha. I gotcha.
You plant a seed, you water it, and it's like biblical. And not to mean to cut you off, Will, but I remember in Sunday school and I forget what verse it was, what passage, and he was saying like the word is like seeds. Mm-hmm. When it goes out, some will land in fertile ground. Some will land on the rocks. Some will land where the birds eat them, right? But you focus on the fertile, right? And the ones that grow. So to Chris's question, go ahead, Will. Love to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think you covered it right there, brother. When you're a teacher, you learn early on that you ain't
gonna reach everybody.
You cannot reach. It's not. It's not realistic.
You don't want to learn. You can't. And that's and so Chris, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's and that's one of the fears why people. Well, I don't want to say one of the fears. That's some of the reason in terms of why people don't want to have the conversation. And that's not a big reason. That's towards the end. The other thing is fear. Okay. And not saying the right thing or the wrong thing or whatever the case may be. But at the end of the day, people get frustrated. And this goes to that ego part, right? Where if I'm trying to convince somebody that this is the right thing and they don't come along, it's hard for me to live with myself. All right. Because I failed and I can't convince them. So now I can't convince them. What do? I get mad. All right. And then I want to erase them out of my book. I don't want to have nothing to do with them no longer, which at the end of the day, that's why I wanted to get into the anti-racism stuff, because the anti-racism stuff, it is about action. Okay. It's not about results. It's about action, right? Like the dude said in the clip, hey, You saw somebody getting jumped, and the first thing you said was, I ain't jump them. All right. Versus jumping in and trying to break it up. Now we can take that parable and like, did the fight stop? Did he get stomped too? I mean, you can go a lot of ways with the results, but the action is really the key.
Yeah. It reminds me, Tony, I saw this video of this young black kid, maybe 13, 14 years old. He's with a bunch of white friends and he has his bike, and a police officer was accusing him of stealing his own bike, and starts tackling him, taking him to the ground, and all those kids get in the way and they get this police officer off of him, and they're yelling at him to stop, and they use their physical bodies to stop this officer from taking this black kid down and brutalizing him. And and it worked, right? Because, that officer wasn't going to do anything to those young white boys. So, and they knew that. And so they stepped in, they used what some would call their white privilege as a shield. And that's an example of taking anti-racist action, right? You saw the injustice happening before your eyes, and you didn't just stand and watch. You didn't just stand and wish something would change. You did something. You used your power. And so, yeah, these are acts of anti-racism.
Buddy, I love it. And I love what you're doing. And it's not easy to do. Okay. Like Chris was saying earlier, you and we know, because we're basically we're doing the same thing. Okay. Is that we want to have this open dialogue, because one of the things that you talked about, and I'm going to back up when you said about there's no place or no system or nothing to destroy racism in the country. And the thing is, it can be easily destroyed by communication. Okay. When you can when you can have these conversations with people, when people can come together and you listen to understand, not listen to defend. Okay. That's what will, how should I say, decrease or melt. It reminds me of the Wizard of Oz. I'm melting. At the end of the day, those are the things. But when you never talk about it, and that's on purpose, right? Just like in the beginning, when we were slaves, they didn't want us to read. Why? Because if you read, then you see that we're pulling a wool. You got rights. There's a constitution. There's this and that. You wasn't supposed to be. We can go deep into that. So let me ask you this. In terms of the dialogue that you have, right? And you said earlier about, hey, I used my, I was a teacher. Talk a little bit about the dialogue in terms of how you try. Your goal is to bring people together who may, going back to Chris's point, who may not even be interested, who may not want to learn anymore, right? But you still use that communication to educate them.
Yeah. So I had a recent guest on my show. His name was Quincy. He's a Black gentleman in the digital marketing space. And he was one of those guys. He was on Twitter constantly denigrating anyone who was talking about anti-racism. And I invited him, of course, to have a dialogue on my show, right? Because that's what I do. And he did agree to have a dialogue. We actually had an incredible conversation off camera, and a really good one on camera as well. I encourage anyone to take a look on my YouTube channel for that. But I guess like one thing that he said was, I don't want to be the one to have these conversations. He's like, I don't want to be the one to, get people out of thinking certain things about other people and this and that and blah, blah, blah. And you know what I said to him? I said, okay, you don't have to be. No one's asking you to be. I'm not asking you to be the one. What I'm asking you to do is stop stepping in people's way who are the one. Right. Support the people who are doing the work, because he agreed that it was work that needed to be done. But then he was constantly stepping in the way of the work being done.
And that's the difference between racist and a racist act and anti-racism.
Exactly.
You see that's the point right there. Nobody asking you to go out and be Moses.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
But don't get in the way to stop somebody else to be Moses. Right.
Exactly.
I think so. I'm understanding what both of y'all are saying, my natural inclination is the math. So I'm gonna go, you're math teacher. The math is you're taking a bucket of water out of the ocean, because for every you and contraband wagon that there is, there's 15. We act as if racism is a static construct, and we're chipping away at it with these good-natured individuals like Tony, like yourself, that's speaking about it and deconstructing the wall. Not taking into account, there are people actively building a steel wall of racism every single day. Like, it's so many more of them that are putting more emphasis into the proliferation of racism, especially nowadays. And they're doing it unapologetically at this point. Like, they're actually building a stronger front to be racist, while we're chipping away with good intentions at trying to be anti-racist.
Let me, I just want to jump in on this, right? Because I have to, right? Okay, and you've been here at the studio, and you know, and I'm looking at it right now. There's a picture on my wall of Frederick Douglass. Mm-hmm. Okay. One man in a system of slavery, one person said, you know what? Escaped slavery. Okay, created his own press, his own newspaper. I was going to bring this up earlier when you're talking about how to communicate. Started communicating and telling white people how slavery really is, and did it in a way where they didn't lynch him. Okay, they didn't string him up and said, hey, this is your holiday on July 4th. This is your Independence Day, and you have a right to celebrate, and blah, blah. I love what he did, and said, but for the slave man, this is nothing to us, right? My point is, going back to what you were saying, that one individual, and it was other people as well, was able to help bring down a system of slavery, right? Which might have been, everybody else is insurmountable. It can't be done. And there were other factors, don't get me wrong. But my point is, you can't just look at it like that, right? And then the other thing we have to think of is that not all white people are racist. Who, you know, I was just listening to my man, Trevor Noah, right? And he had Ta-Nehisi Coates on his episode, right? And at the end of the day, you know, Trevor Noah is from South Africa. Okay. And he was talking about apartheid. Right. And all these things were going on. And then he said, Tony, not me. He said, he was talking. He said, listen, he said, there were white people that were living in South Africa. Right. That said, I had no clue this was going on. Right. And his point was, everybody would think, how wouldn't you want to know? Well, the government, from a media standpoint, they didn't show none of that stuff that was going on. They didn't let music and stuff that was coming in from the United States, talking about Soweto and stuff of that nature. They didn't do none of that. Right. So at the end of the day, they built a system, right, to even keep their own people ignorant. And then they were promoting that, hey, the Bantus, they love it like this. This is this and that and the whole 9 yards. So it's no different here, right? And this is where I get pushback, right? It's no different here. If somebody grew up and there was no diversity around them, okay? And they never experienced diversity. And the only way they learn about it is what the media says or what their family teaches them. Well, how would they know? And then more importantly, when these things don't affect you, when they don't affect you, you're like, what they talking about, right? What they doing? But then the key is back to my boy, Contraband, is having these conversations. And Chris, you and I have seen this when we've been doing this work, you know, at DirecTV and beyond. People, lights go off. Like, wow, I never knew that. Wow, I had people come on my call each week who never spoke up. They would just be there on the call listening. And they would email me, you know, a year later too. Hey, Tony, man, I just want to let you know, I join your call each week. I don't say anything, but I love to because I'm learning so much, right? So that's why and look, you're right, Chris, it isn't an ocean, okay? But at the end of the day, these little buckets, these pails of water that we're digging can make a huge difference.
Yeah, we're creating our own little climate change, Chris. All right. And just one thing I want to say about it is you know, it's exactly what Tony was saying. Um, you don't know the impact that one person can have, like, and the numbers game isn't like matching numbers.
Mm-hmm.
That's not really how this works. Um, each one teach one.
Mm.
We could have exponential growth, brother. And we have an unprecedented way to make that happen in a rapid time period right now. That's what I'm saying. We've never had that before.
Mm.
We never really had anything like any possibility like this before. And that is why a lot of people are springing into action, because many of us, justice fighters, if you will,
Mhm.
have recognized that now is the time to collaborate, to spread the word, to educate, and to create dialogue. The more we can do that consistently and strategically and in an organized fashion, you'll see that the change will come like a mighty wave.
There's no question.
Yeah.
There's no question.
How do you, and so with that, knowing where you are now and knowing where you'd like to be, how do you see Contraband Wagon and its evolution going forward? What is your vision that will impact the future that you just spoke of?
Yeah. So right now, what we're doing is I have 2-hour live conversations one-on-one on my Twitch channel. Okay. So these people from all over the world can tune in and watch that. We've had people watching from all over the world, literally. And I've had over 130 of those. I'm going to continue that.
Mm-hmm.
I have monthly racism discussion groups that are private on Zoom with anywhere from, just a few to up to 15 people we've had at one time. And we do round robin discussion on race, where people can just listen and they can pass their turn and listen, or they can speak up on anything they want to talk about on the subject of race. And we've had all kinds of incredible stories shared through that. I did a lot of panel discussions where I did the intersection of race in various contexts, intersection of race and education, religion, law enforcement, criminal justice, tech, media, the arts, anything you could think of, we did. And I would get people who work in those contexts, and they would speak for 15 minutes each on what that intersection means to them and through their experience. And then there would be a long Q&A. And those were some of our most attended events. I want to get those back. Those happened during the pandemic and they kind of fell off a little bit, but we're going to bring those back. And of course, it all started with my live discussion group meetings. Ultimately, where this is going for me is to do large scale live events. I want these events to be in churches. I want them to be at colleges and universities. I want them to be at community centers. And we're going to make it like a game show. All right. Because you know how people like their entertainment. So we got to make it entertaining too. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give just a little 10, 15-minute speech where I just talk and tell people the same things I'm telling you guys about why I started the Contraband Wagon and my own evolution of race consciousness and what I'm trying to do with it. And then I'm going to sit down in a chair and have an open chair across from me and invite audience members to come up and dialogue with me right there up on the stage. And I'm going to have 10 golden tickets. And I'm going to hand one out for anyone who asks a great question, who makes a really good point. And those 10 people, I'm going to take them out to dinner the next day. So it's a 2-day event like that. And that way, I can feed some people. All right. I can identify those people who do get those seeds planted on fertile ground, and I can build collaborative teams with them. And I can spread the word, and I can show, right, contemporaneously, in the moment, presently, how to be an anti-racist, how to have the dialogue, how to have the conversation to large groups of people. So that's where the next step of the Contraband Wagon is for me, is to build that network.
Buddy, I love it. Especially I love the part, well, you going from just one-on-ones to, let's get churches and let's, fill a hall and get people together. But I also love the part in terms of the live example, right? Because people can see what anti-racism is, right? They can learn just based on the dialogue that's going on. So I think that is fantastic. Buddy, I love you a lot. What final thoughts? What's something that you want to leave with our listeners regarding the Contraband Wagon?
I just want the listeners to kind of tune in to some of these conversations. You know, we have short clips from the conversations. They're 2 hours long, but I don't expect anyone to take 2 hours out. I know everyone's busy these days, but we have clips anywhere from 1 minute long up to 15 minutes long that are on my YouTube channel of the same name, The Contraband Wagon. So check some of those out, okay? And if you can, tune into some of the live conversations. You can look on my website, www.thecontrabandwagon.com. It has an events calendar. It tells you what upcoming guests are going to be on. So if someone interests you, try to tune in and check out the live conversation. You can also watch the replay on my Twitch channel. It'll be up there for about a week and a half. And we also do a book club. I don't think I mentioned that. So if you're interested in being a part of a book club, we've read Dr. King. We even read some of the color blindness promoting folks. We read Coleman Hughes's book. We have one on Wednesday about the myth of Black buying power by James Ball. So we read a lot of different types of literature that, you know, educate me. You know, I'm still learning more and more myself about race and anti-racism and white supremacy, as we all need to continue educating ourselves if we're going to be effective as dismantling it. So I just want people to recognize that there's no real gurus out here. Okay. We're all in here learning and growing together. And all you need to do is decide to become one of those people who's learning and growing. That decision in and of itself is an act of anti-racism. And every decision that you make based on that initial decision is also an act of anti-racism. So I encourage people to start making those choices today. All right.
Mr. Will Fullwood, teacher, lawyer, podcast host, racial therapist, all these things that you encompass so well. How can a Black Executive Perspective podcast help you any further than the trajectory that you currently find yourself on?
Well, first of all, I want both you, Chris, and you, Tony, to make an appearance on my show.
Done.
100%.
Done.
I want you guys on my show. I want to talk to y'all about your own evolution of race consciousness. I would love for you guys to just anything that you took away from this conversation, feel free to mention it to future guests and to your audiences. And any way that you can help me start moving toward these large scale live events. I really think that you guys have a very thorough understanding of the work that I'm trying to do and why I'm trying to do it. And I think that that is going to be a barrier to me trying to make these live events occur, is that a lot of people I'm going to need to collaborate with are not going to have that understanding. And you guys have a network and you have the understanding. So I need your help, man. I need you guys to help me lock these events in, lock these people in, get them, grab their ear, you know, and get them to understand the value of what I'm trying to do. And yeah, that's how y'all can help.
Buddy, that's easy. It's already done. Like Chris already put an exclamation point on that. So count us in. But more importantly, we want to thank you for coming on a Black Executive Perspective podcast, sharing your perspective, telling everyone about the Contraband Wagon. We wish you nothing but mad success. We are doing exactly the same thing that you're doing. So I know how much work and effort that you put into it. And also the other thing that we didn't talk about, but I'm going to bring up right now, for you to do this shows the love of humanity, right? Because there is no rewards, right? There's no, I'm going to win this or get this. This is a lot of hard work. It can be negative at times, right? Going back to Chris's point, it can, you see a sea of or ocean of a lot of that's not flowing in the right way, and you just got a bucket and you're trying to take water in a little bit at a time. So I just want to give you a lot of kudos for what you do, and it's positive that you are, and you're still so inspired to do it, buddy. I love you a lot. And again, we want to thank you for coming on and being here and sharing your perspective on the Black Executive Perspective podcast.
Thank you so much for that gratitude, Tony. And I want to express my gratitude to you and you as well, Chris. Thank you guys for your thoughtful questions and this amazing conversation. And I really look forward to working with both of you all in the future. And again, thanks for this opportunity.
No problem, my man. No problem. So now I think it's time for
Tony's Tidbit.
Okay, so the tidbit today is always about what we talked about our episode. So the tidbit today, and I quote, "When we engage openly on difficult topics like race, we dilute the power of ignorance and strengthen the bonds of community. The path to understanding begins with asking questions, listening deeply, and sharing stories that matter." And you heard a lot of that from our brother Will Fullwood here today, and we really appreciate him and we love him a lot.
And we definitely want to remind you all, again, like we always do, to tune in to the Black Executive Perspective podcast segment, Need to Know with Nasinga. This is the segment where Dr. Nasinga Burton gives you her perspective, her information, her wealth of knowledge, her education on a myriad of subjects that are very critical and crucial to where we are in this world at this point in time. This helps shape our world and our community and make us collectively better. Make sure that you tune in. You do not want to miss what this sister has to say.
Absolutely. Definitely tune in every Thursday. And we're glad that you tune in today to today's episode, Building Bridges Through Conversation with AKA the Contraband Wagon, Will Fullwood.
We also want to remind you to help us in our pursuit to diminish discrimination wherever it may rear its ugly head. And we do that with our call to action, LESS, L-E-S-S. And in that, the L stands for learn. Educate yourself on racial and cultural nuances to better be prepared for when these things will come up, pun intended, and make sure that you can speak eloquently and from a position of strength as you move forward in your life.
Absolutely. And for everybody to know, our call to action is anti-racism. Mm-hmm. This is an anti-racism act, right? So Chris talked about learn, and then after L is the letter E, empathy. Now, since you've learned, now you should be more empathetic to your friends and colleagues because now you understand what they've been going through.
And then the first S is for share. You want to connect with servant leaders like Will and share your insights and increase that dialogue that he spoke of to make sure that we're calibrating ourselves to understand the reality of the world that we live in.
And then the final S is stop. You want to stop discrimination, as we talked about earlier, anti-racism, as it walks in your path. So if grandpa says something inappropriate at the Thanksgiving table, you say, "Grandpa, we don't believe that. We don't do that." And you stop it right then. So if everyone can incorporate less, LESS, we'll build a more fair, more understanding world. And more importantly, we'll all see the change that we want to see because less will become more.
We want to emphasize you continue to tune in to our episodes where we try to meet you where you are and speak on topics that mean something to you. But please go to our website, sign up for our newsletter. Make sure you review and subscribe and tell us what you want to hear about and how we're doing so far in this journey. And where can they find us, Tony?
Buddy, they can follow us wherever they get their podcasts. And they can follow us on our socials of LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and X at a Black Exec. For our fabulous guests, my man, the Contraband Wagon is going along, pulling people in, educating them and loving them, Will Fullwood. For the co-host with the most, my man down in Dallas, the Cowboys ain't nothing, but he's a Baltimore Raven fan, my boy
Indeed.
Chris P. Reed, right? I'm Tony Tidbit. We talked about it. We learned about it today. We love you. And guess what? We're out.
A Black Executive Perspective.